The courtroom froze the moment the clippers snapped on, not because anyone expected them, not because it was procedure, but because what was happening wasn't supposed to happen anywhere, let alone inside a police precinct tied to an active court case. The woman sat in a metal chair bolted to the floor, wrists cuffed behind her back, shoulders squared, spine straight. Her dark curls were neatly styled, pulled back with care, the kind of hair that took time, patience, and pride. The kind of hair a black woman doesn't just wear but carries, as identity, history, dignity. An officer stepped behind her and shoved her head forward. "Don't move." The clippers touched her scalp. Bzzzzzzz. The first strip of hair slid down her forehead and landed in her lap. A laugh broke out behind her. "Damn," one officer said. "That's satisfying." Another leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Bet she won't be talking slick after this." They didn't read her name. They didn't ask her position. They didn't care. To them, she was just another black woman who'd forgotten her place. The clippers carved through her hair unevenly, deliberately slow, not clean like a barber's hand, but rough, careless. Strands fell to the concrete floor in clumps. Someone nudged a pile with their boot like it was trash. "You should have kept your mouth shut in court." An officer muttered near her ear, "Thought you were smarter than us." Her jaw tightened. Still, she said nothing. Silence unsettled them more than screaming would have. No begging, no crying, no shaking, just stillness, control, that annoyed them. "You hear me?" One officer snapped, pressing the clippers harder. "I said you should have. Watch your tone." Another interrupted with a laugh. "She might hold us in contempt again." They burst out laughing. What they didn't notice was the way her eyes lifted slightly. Not in fear, not in pain, in calculation, because less than 6 hours earlier, those same men had stood in front of her. Not above her, not beside her, below her. That morning, she had entered courtroom 4B wearing a black judicial robe that carried decades of earned authority. The seal of the state hung behind her bench. The gallery was full, the air tight. The case on her docket, People v. Harris and Cole. 2 officers, 1 body cam malfunction. 1 black defendant with bruises no report could explain. She listened as the prosecution laid out evidence. She watched as the defense leaned heavily on confidence instead of facts. And when officers Harris and Cole took the stand, she noticed everything. The smirks, the relaxed posture, the way they spoke like the courtroom belonged to them. At first, she allowed it. Then Harris laughed during testimony. She looked up slowly. "Officer, this is a courtroom, not a locker room." The laugh stopped. Moments later, Cole rolled his eyes when she sustained an objection. "Is there a problem?" she asked calmly. "No, Your Honor," he replied, but his tone said otherwise. The third time came when Cole muttered something under his breath after she denied a motion. She paused. "Officer," she said evenly, "repeat that for the court." He didn't. The room went silent. She warned him once. He smirked. She warned him twice. He leaned back, arms crossed. "With all due respect, you don't know what it's like on the street." Her gaze never wavered. "With all due respect, I know exactly what the law requires." That was when she made the decision. "Officer Cole," she said, voice firm, "you are in contempt of court." The bailiff hesitated. Cole laughed. Actually laughed. "You serious?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "Take him into custody." That laugh vanished. What followed wasn't justice. It was retaliation. Because within the hour, paperwork moved faster than it ever had before. Charges were rewritten. A vague allegation appeared. Disorderly conduct, interference, judicial misconduct investigation pending. And before the day was over, the woman who had entered the courtroom as the presiding judge was escorted through a side door of the very same building. No robe, no bench, no authority visible, just cuffs. That's when they stopped seeing her as who she was, and started seeing her as who they thought she was. A black woman who dared to speak. A black woman who dared to challenge power. A black woman they believed they could break. So now the clippers buzzed again. Another strip fell, you know. One officer said casually, "You should be grateful we're just shaving your head." Her breath stayed steady because she knew something they didn't. By sunrise, every one of them would be standing in her courtroom again, and this time there would be no laughter. They left her like that for hours, not in a cell with a door that slammed shut, not somewhere hidden. They left her in a holding room with a cracked mirror on the wall and fluorescent lights that hummed loud enough to crawl under your skin. Hair still clung to her clothes, to the cuffs biting into her wrists, to the cold metal chair beneath her. Every time she shifted, another strand fell. No one offered her water. No one offered her paperwork. No one explained what was happening. That was the point. Humiliation doesn't work if it's rushed. It needs time to settle. It needs silence. An officer passed the room and slowed down just long enough to glance in. Their eyes met for a split second. He smirked, then kept walking. She exhaled slowly. She had spent her entire career teaching herself how to breathe through pressure, through verdicts that changed lives, through families sobbing in her courtroom, through knowing that no matter how perfect she was, there would always be people waiting for her to fail louder than others. She rolled her shoulders back as much as the cuffs allowed and closed her eyes. They thought shaving her hair was the end of the story. They didn't know it was the beginning. The charges finally arrived on a clipboard carried by a young officer who wouldn't meet her gaze. Disorderly conduct, obstruction, abuse of judicial authority, words chosen carefully, vague enough to stain her name without proof. She read every line. Sign here, he muttered. I'd like to speak with counsel, she said calmly. He blinked. You don't get to make demands right now. She looked up at him, eyes steady, voice even. I'm not making a demand. I'm invoking a right. Something flickered across his face, uncertainty. He stepped back and left the room without another word. That night the mugshot was taken. They didn't let her fix her hair, didn't offer her a comb, didn't uncuff her. The camera flashed, and for the first time she felt it. Not shame, not fear, but clarity. Because she knew exactly how this would play out. The next morning, the photo hit internal systems, then local law enforcement chatter, then a leak. By noon, it was circulating online. Black judge arrested after courtroom outburst. Judicial misconduct under investigation. The comments came fast. Thought she was above the law. Power went to her head. Good. They need to learn respect. They didn't show the video from the holding room. They didn't mention the shaved hair. They didn't name the officers. By the time she was released on bond, the narrative was already written, or so they thought. Her attorney arrived before sunset. A woman she'd worked with for years. Quiet, sharp, thorough. They overplayed their hand. Her attorney said after reviewing the charges, badly. They usually do. She replied, what they did to you will be addressed. She interrupted gently. In order. They sat in silence for a moment. Tomorrow morning, her attorney continued, your courtroom is still on the docket. Technically, you haven't been suspended. The ethics review hasn't even been formally filed. A pause. You can preside. She smiled faintly for the first time since the clippers buzzed. Good. The next morning, officers Harris and Cole arrived early. They were relaxed, joking, confident. Word had already spread that the judge from yesterday had been put in her place. They'd heard about the arrest. Someone showed them the mugshot on a phone, laughing. She won't be back, Cole said. Career's done. Even if she is, Harris replied, shrugging, she won't look the same. They took their seats at the defense table, uniforms crisp, faces smug. The courtroom began to fill. Defense attorneys whispered. Prosecutors shuffled papers. The gallery buzzed with low conversation. Then the bailiff stood. All rise. The room obeyed. The door behind the bench opened. And she walked in, no robe yet, just a tailored navy suit. Her head was uncovered, no wig, no scarf. The shaved patches were visible, uneven, undeniable. The room went silent in a way Harris and Cole had never experienced. She stepped behind the bench. Only then did she pull the robe over her shoulders. The seal of the court loomed behind her once more. She looked out across the room, directly at them. Be seated, she said. Harris felt his stomach drop. Cole's mouth went dry. She adjusted her glasses calmly, as if nothing had happened, as if the last 24 hours hadn't existed. Before we proceed, she said evenly, the court has several matters to address. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. She picked up a folder, thick, heavy. First, she continued, this court acknowledges the pending review concerning my conduct. That review does not suspend my authority, nor does it limit my ability to preside over this case. Her eyes flicked briefly to the defense table. Second, she said, this court has received new evidence overnight. That was when the first whisper rippled through the gallery. Harris leaned toward his attorney. What evidence? The attorney shook his head, pale. She pressed a button. The screen behind her lit up. Video, not body cam footage. Security footage. From inside the precinct, the holding room, the clippers buzzing, hair falling. The room erupted. Gasps. Murmurs. Someone stood up in the gallery. She raised her hand once. Silence returned instantly. This footage, she said calmly, was time-stamped, authenticated, and submitted by an anonymous source less than 12 hours ago. She paused. Along with audio, the sound filled the room, laughter, slurs, threats. You should have kept your mouth shut in court. Harris felt the blood drain from his face. Cole's attorney whispered frantically, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. She leaned forward slightly. Officers Harris and Cole, she said, voice steady, stand. They didn't move, stand. She repeated. They rose slowly, knees stiff. Yesterday? She continued, you testified under oath regarding your respect for departmental policy, proper procedure, and the dignity of all individuals in your custody. She tapped the folder once. Today, this court has reason to believe that testimony was false. The room held its breath. She looked directly at them now, and this time, she said quietly, there will be consequences. But she wasn't finished, not even close. The courtroom felt smaller now, not because the walls had moved, but because the truth had. Officers Harris and Cole stood stiff at the defense table. Shoulders squared the way they'd been trained, but their eyes betrayed them. They weren't looking at the judge anymore. They were looking at the screen behind her, frozen on a frame that showed clippers pressed to her scalp, her head forced forward by a gloved hand. The judge let the silence stretch. In her courtroom, silence was never empty. It was deliberate, it was pressure. Counsel, she said at last, turning to the defense attorney, do you wish to explain why your client's sworn testimony yesterday directly contradicts the evidence now before this court? The attorney swallowed. Your Honor, we have not yet reviewed. You have, she replied calmly. Your paralegal accessed this file at 7:42 a.m. The attorney froze. A ripple moved through the gallery. She turned back to Harris and Cole. You are entrusted with the authority to restrain, to detain, and to protect. Instead, you humiliated, you retaliated, and you lied. Cole's mouth opened. Nothing came out. She pressed another button. More footage played, this time audio transcripts scrolling beneath the video, time stamps, officer badge numbers, laughter clearly labeled. You thought. She continued evenly that because I was no longer wearing this robe, I was no longer protected by the law. She touched the edge of the bench lightly. You were wrong. The prosecutor rose slowly. Your Honor, in light of this evidence, the state moves to dismiss all charges against the defendant in the original arrest and requests an immediate referral of officers Harris and Cole to the Attorney General for criminal investigation. The words hung in the air like thunder. The defense attorney shot to his feet. Objection denied, she said instantly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The gallery erupted. Gasps, whispers, disbelief. A reporter scribbled furiously. Another lifted a phone, only to be stopped by the bailiff. She raised her hand once. Silence fell again. This court is also issuing an emergency order. She continued, mandating the preservation of all internal communications, reports, and footage related to this incident. Any destruction or alteration will be treated as obstruction of justice. Her gaze swept the room. And let me be very clear, she said softly, this order applies to every rank, every badge, every office. Harris's knees buckled slightly. Cole stared straight ahead, face drained of color. She leaned forward, eyes locked on them. "You laughed," she said quietly, "because you believed there would be no consequences." She paused. "This is the consequence." She struck the gavel. Court adjourned. The sound echoed. By noon, the video was everywhere. Not the mugshot this time, the footage, the laughter, the clippers, the silence of the woman in the chair. Public reaction was immediate and explosive. Protests formed outside the precinct before sunset. The mayor called an emergency press conference. The police chief announced the officers had been placed on unpaid leave pending investigation. By morning, that announcement changed. They were fired. By the end of the week, they were indicted. Civil rights violations, abuse of power, tampering with evidence, perjury, the ethics complaint against the judge, dismissed unanimously. The Judicial Review Board issued a statement calling her conduct measured, lawful, and exemplary under extreme provocation. They offered counseling, security, a public apology. She declined the apology. She accepted the ruling. Weeks later, she returned to the bench fully, same courtroom, same seal, same authority. The first case she presided over after everything was a sentencing hearing. A young black woman sat at the defense table, hands folded, eyes terrified. Minor charge. Over-policed neighborhood. A mistake magnified into a threat. The judge listened. Then she looked down gently. "This court recognizes the difference," she said, "between accountability and cruelty." She sentenced the woman to community service, education, opportunity, not punishment. As the courtroom emptied, a clerk approached her quietly. "Your Honor," she said, hesitant, "may I ask, how did you stay so calm after what they did?" The judge paused, then she answered honestly, "Because I knew who I was," she said, "and I knew who they weren't." She gathered her files, stood, and walked out beneath the seal of the court, head high, hair growing back on her own terms, dignity untouched. Power had tried to humiliate her. The law answered back. And if this story moved you, if you believe truth always finds its way to the light, subscribe to RES Stories, and stay with us for more stories where silence becomes strength and justice always has the final word.